Hi everybody, Ed here, and we're in the glass studio today. And today we're talking about the top 10 soldering tips for stained glass. So when we're grinding glass or cutting glass and you don't wear glasses like Ed does, please make sure you have a pair of safety glasses in your studio. You want to make sure that you have a dust mask, and you want to make sure that you have correct and proper ventilation in your studio while you're soldering. Once we have our glass cut and we have it ground, now we're going to want to make sure that we clean it. I like to use 70% isopropyl alcohol because not only does it clean the glass really well, but it also evaporates and won't leave a film on the edge so that your copper foil will stick correctly. Now, second of all, you want to make sure that your copper foil is not oxidized. If it's oxidized, kind of just peel off a little bit of it. You might want to peel off a little bit and say, oh, well, you know, that looks pretty trashy. So we'll get rid of that, and now we'll start right here on this end. I like to use blackback copper foil, and whether it's made by Edco or Venture, either one, doesn't matter. And now we want to make sure that the copper foil, it's not oxidized, it looks really nice, and by keeping it in this caddy, you'll find that it doesn't oxidize as fast. And then what you want to do, we're using blackback 7/32 copper foil here, and we're gonna copper foil this piece right here in this kite. So I like to start my copper foil about 1/4 of an inch beyond where I'm gonna stop. And then I like to look at it this way. I like to look straight down on it where I can use my fingers. And I try not to touch these edges. You don't really want to touch these edges because the oil from your hand will get on the edges. And what happens when you do that is that, again, the foil won't stick because it doesn't stick to oil. So I like to drag my fingers up and I like to turn the glass all at the same time. And when I do my overlap here, I just take a small pair of scissors and we're going to clip it, let it extends out beyond that corner just a little tiny bit, and then we'll flip that over and we'll make sure that we put that down. Now I just take the edges of my fingers and help get this bent over first around the edge of the glass before I do any kind of burnishing or anything. And you want to make sure now that you're getting ready to burnish your glass that when you're burnishing it, you pull it towards you. Like that. On both sides, you want to do both sides. And I always make sure that I take the edge of my fid here and I burnish it on the edge. What this does is it heats the glue up on your copper foil, also flattens it out nice, doesn't give you any little wrinkles or anything. But then take and make sure, okay, that you pull it to you. And I always keep an X-Acto knife on my bench when I'm copper foiling, simply for this little reason right here. That little reason, I'm gonna point on it, and we're just gonna take that, and we're getting rid of it, okay? Because we don't need that in there. Anywhere copper foil goes, the solder is gonna stick to it, and you want this to look really nice, so we don't need that copper foil right there. So let's do one of the tail pieces for our kite project. So now we're doing a tail piece, and we just decided to use 4 different colors on our tail for our kite, just because we wanted it really colorful anyway. You know, kites, even when we were kids, we used to dress them up with different tails. Nobody just stuck white cloth on the tail of a kite. Everybody did something different. So we're going to take this, and you know what, these little pieces of tail, they represent, you know, like a torn sheet or something like we used to use on our kites. And they kind of look like a little dog bone too. So, but we're going to burnish this all the way around because it's just going to make it look nicer, and we're going to eliminate all of these wrinkles here. This point. And now we need to talk a little bit about soldering irons. you know, they make 100-watt soldering irons and 80-watt soldering irons and 45-watt soldering irons. I use two different irons. I use an 80-watt soldering iron, and this is a Weller right here. This is a Weller 1175, and I want you to see that when I get done with this, I clean that tip off so that it's ready to go when I get ready to work. So this one has the tip actually comes out kind of like screwing in a light bulb, and this is a 80-watt iron, and I use, you know, I enjoy really using this because if you see, it's got a 1/4-inch chisel tip on it, and I can put that up on the edge, and I'll show you in just a little bit on how to utilize this soldering iron. So, and then, you know, Weller makes another one. They make a 100-watt iron. This is a heavy-duty 100-watt iron, has a 700-degree tip in it. And of course, you can manipulate these, undo this little screw right here. This tip comes right out, okay? So once that tip comes out, your job on this tip here, because it does remove so easy, is gonna be so that you can keep the heat down near the bottom. I'm just gonna show you a little trick. If you'll take your tip out and steel wool it and get rid of any of that corrosion right there, your tip, the heat will go back down into the tip much easier, and you'll find that there's really nothing wrong with your iron other than that you need to clean it a little bit. And the same way goes for up here, up around this edge here. You can see where this gets hot. You can clean all that area right there. But when you're done with it, you need to take a damp cloth. When you turn the heat off, allow it to cool just a little bit and then take a damp cloth, and I'll show you how to clean that coming right up. So as we move along in this process about the top 10 tips for soldering stained glass, we're to the point now where we need to talk a little bit about flux. I like to use ruby flux, and you'll see I keep it in gallons. So we are able to use, because we use quite a bit of it, we're building a lot of stained glass windows. But you'll find that if you trim your brush up a little bit, I'll show you in a minute how to do that, and you won't be using as much ruby flux or any other flux. Now the ruby flux I like because it doesn't smoke, and it doesn't put off these gosh awful fumes, and it doesn't make the tip of your tongue tingle and burn, okay? But anyway, I just want to let you know, we use ruby flux here in the glass studio, and I love it. Now on our brush, I want you to see, when you get your little brush, it's got a really floppy head on it, and it's a big and bushy. If you'll cut your brush down to that length right there off the handle, you'll find that you don't use as much flux as ever, and you won't have all that spitting and sputtering and like little bubbles popping up. Because what's happening, if you're working with your iron, you got too much flux, that iron is, you know, 400 or 500, 600 degrees, and it's gonna boil that flux right away. And there's nothing, y'all, nothing in the rules of stained glass that say you have to boil your flux before you solder. All right, so now we're still talking a little bit about flux, but I want to show you how to apply your flux correctly. So the first thing we're going to do on this kite project is we're going to tack solder it in place so that it doesn't move around on us. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take our little flux brush that we've already trimmed the top of it, put it into our flux, and then shake it a little bit, okay? So we're going to put a little dab there, a little dab there, a little dab there. We're going to right there where that all crosses in there, and we're going to put a little bit right here. So let's just squeeze this back together. Now, in our videos, you've seen me talk about the temperature that I like to work at. I want you to see, I want you to see the color of my tip. It's a pretty bluish, silverish gold, okay? Nothing crazy about it. It's not turning black. But I want you to watch my solder. I'm going to count to 1. Ready? 1. My iron is hot, and it's ready to go. So we're going to tack solder this straight down and straight up. Straight down and straight up. And one more. Straight down and straight up. So now we have our kite tack soldered together, everybody. So now it's going to stay together for us. We can maneuver it around, and now we don't have to worry about it. So what we're going to want to do here, we've got all this all done, and we'll be right back, and we're going to talk a little bit about solder. So we just tack soldered our kite together, and I've set my iron off to the side, and I've done that for two reasons. Because I want it to sit there, and I want you to see that it's not changing colors or anything. It's staying the exact temperature that I want. But we're going to talk a little bit about solder. Now, when you're soldering stained glass, please don't use any kind of solder except the solder that is manufactured specifically for stained glass applications. Now, there's two that I like to use because we don't want to, some of stained glass solders have a lot of trash in them. But when you're doing copper foil, you're going to want to use 60-40 solder. 60-40 being 60% tin, 40% lead. And this I found is probably, well, I think it is in my arsenal of tools, is the Canfield 60-40. It's a little bit pricey. Of course, everything's pricey now. But I like the Canfield 60-40 when I'm copper foiling. And because I do a lot of lead work, I use 50-50 on the lead because I enjoy working with the Victory white metals, and they're out of Ohio. So both of these, this is manufactured in New Jersey from Canfield, and the Victory white metals is manufactured in Cleveland. Okay, so now we're going to talk about one of the simplest pieces of equipment that's sitting on your workbench, and a lot of you may not have one. I don't know. But let me tell you what I got going on here. we're going to talk about rheostats just for a moment, and we're going to talk about rheostats because they can control the temperature of your iron for you. Now, I like to use, and I did my test last week, and I made sure, because I wanted to know what temperature that I work at. And I explained to everyone that I like to stick my iron tip under the solder and it go 1 and it melt. Well, it does that. And since we've been talking, my rheostat has been sitting on number 8. And I'm going to bring my soldering iron up and I'm going to show the camera that the tip on my iron has not turned blue or black or any other color. It's got a little bit from sitting on it right here, but I want to show you what I do with that. If you take and now this, when I wipe this off, it's going to turn like almost a light blue silver and a gold. Look at that, okay? See that? See the blue coming up? That's as hot as it's going to get because I have my rheostat or my iron controller tuned in to number 8. And that's the temperature that I like to work with. Now, you don't need a rheostat if you have one of those really nice Hayco irons because that has a rheostat in the handle. You only need one rheostat to control the temperature within your iron. I want you to look at it now. We're just sitting here. Look at that. We're just sitting here. That iron is not turning black. It's not pitted. There's nothing wrong with it. So what the rheostat does is it's going to save your tip. It's going to give you the correct temperature to work with so that because if you're working too hot, everybody, this foil will lift up. You'll actually burn that glue away and that foil will go from this to this and then you'll get flux or even patina trapped underneath of it so that when you think you've got it cleaned, it's still not completely cleaned and you may have an etching problem from the chemicals itself on your work. And none of us want that. So we flipped over our kite and we're gonna go ahead and tack solder this side. And then I'm gonna show you 2 individual ways to approach soldering your work. So here we go. You see our first touch and go side of this beautiful kite. And now we're gonna start right on down the center of the kite. And it's 1, 2, straight up. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. See the solder shoot back behind me? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And there is our touch and go method. Let's go ahead and finish this out because this is going to be a beautiful little project. We're going to go back into our flux, Ruby Flux, everybody. So here we go. We're going to repeat this touch and go soldering. And this is a surefire way if you're just starting out doing stained glass, Or if maybe you've been doing it for a while and still have trouble beading up. The one reason you may have trouble beading your solder up is you might be working too hot. And we'll reference back to our wattage controller, iron controller for that reason. So here we go. We're just going to flux it a little bit. And now we're going to do our touch and go, starting over here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now remember, when you come to this junction here, that's a cross, y'all, and it needs to look like one. So then to clean up your touch and go, you just on top, straight up, on top, straight up, just like that. And you know what happens? It beads up and it looks really nice. Let's start over here on this side. And we're going to 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay? There we go. First, we're going to go ahead and tin the outside of this project just like that. Okay. 1, 2. 1, 2. Just like that. Okay. So now we've tinned this side and we've touch and go this side. This side, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you how to run a bead. Now, and I've got it set on the same thing, the same process, same iron, and I'm just going to clean my tip a little bit. It's going to give us, see the gold coming up on that? That just tells me it's the perfect temperature, everybody. So let's do this. Before we start to run our bead, let's tin the outside of this side. Let's go ahead and tin it because we're getting ready to do some really crazy stuff. We're going to learn how to run a bead of solder. And the most important thing about that is that you can't run it too fast. You have to keep up with the way that your solder is melting. So I found I enjoy working at a number 8 temperature or a number 8 number on my rheostat, which is about 510 degrees. So let's do this. We're going to get our flux. We're going to shake it off. I'm going to put a little bit of flux right here, and we're going to do across this way. Now this we're going to run a bead. And if you notice, my soldering iron, the tip is tilted onto an angle. I'm using it at probably about 30 degrees, and I'm going to get it started, and then we're just going to hold the solder above it. And you see I'm giving it time to melt. Okay? If you don't give it time to melt, it's not going to do what you need it to do. So here we go. Let's talk about that and do it again. Here we go. You see that bead? If you get the temperature right on your iron, you can run it as slow or as fast as you want, but you feed the solder up here, okay? I'm feeding the solder from right here at the top of my tip. Ladies and gentlemen, you can run a bead, you can do the touch and go. So we're almost doing like a touch and go method around the outside edge of this because I would like it to bead up, and that's exactly what it's doing. And you can see it's nice and round right there on the top that I've done. So let's go ahead, we'll take it out, flip it over, and we're gonna do the same thing all the way around, and this is gonna give that copper foil quite a bit of rigidity, and it just makes it look so much more professional when you finish the edges. Don't do everything else real nice and then not finish the edges of even if it's a sun catcher. Finish the edges, and in a moment we're going to talk about how to clean this up correctly. Okay, here we go. Hey, we're back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to clean this kite. We've soldered it. We've got flux all over it. My hands are fluxed up. And what I've done is I put a little bit of baking soda in a bowl with some water, and I'm just going to kind of mix that around. And now I'm going to clean this window, this little sun catcher, this kite, like nobody's business, okay? So keep in mind, the baking soda is an acid neutralizer. So what we're doing with this, and this is the best way that black patina works on your work. So we've cleaned this off. I'll get this rinsed off and we'll come back and I'll show you how the patina works. So now we're just gonna talk a little bit about patina. Now they make a copper patina, they make a black patina, they make a patina for zinc. However, it doesn't matter which patina you use if your glass isn't cleaned correctly, it's just not gonna work for you. So what we've done is we've taken the kite, we've washed it with water and baking soda, rinsed it off, and now I'm going to show you what happens when this is clean. Now, I like to use a brush when I use my patina, so here we go. Let's try this. Watch how dark this gets and how fast it does it. Look at that. And it's look at that. See it? But this is your 60-40 solder working with the tin. This black patina is designed to darken tin. So if we use our 60-40 solder, guess what's going to happen? And we clean it correctly. We have to clean it correctly. If you don't clean it correctly, it's not going to look like this. I can promise you that. And if your patina, when you put it on your window, isn't dark like this, it's not cleaned out correctly. Now we need to remove the patina residue and we need to go ahead and wax our kite when it's completed. I love this little design. It's a very nice project for you to start out with as a beginner project. And it doesn't matter how simple the projects are. Every time you build a project, y'all, you're gonna learn something different, okay? So now that I'm done here in the studio, we've got this kite cleaned up. I'm gonna turn my iron off here at the rheostat. We're gonna back it down to 0. I'm gonna take my iron. Now that it's started, see, I've cut the power to it. Now it's starting to cool off. But when I get ready to use my iron again, I want it to look nice. I'm gonna take this excess solder right off the tip of my iron, wipe it down, and when I come back to it, my tip will look just like that. It's cooling off, and there's nothing left on it, and it's tinned. I don't have to tin it. If you don't put Flux on your tip, and if you do use a rheostat, you won't find yourself having to tin your tip. So that's a good idea. Try it. Your work will change, I promise, and you'll be much more satisfied with the way your work turns out. I've turned my rheostat off. My iron is cooling down. I've wiped my tip, and the very last thing I'm gonna do before I head out is I'm gonna unplug my soldering iron from my rheostat. Then there's no way in the world that it can do any harm while we're gone. So if you like this video that we just did about soldering your stained glass, check out our videos for more updated versions of cutting on glass, how to cut your glass, how to use your hand tools, and all of those very specific things that you need to know are on our channel.
Thank you.